You feel overwhelmed by pressures that seem to multiply daily, and every setback shakes your confidence to its core. The stress is affecting your sleep, your health, and your happiness. While you watch others maintain their composure under similar circumstances, leaving you wondering what secret they possess. I am Marcus Aurelius, who maintained inner peace while ruling the most powerful empire in history and bearing the weight of millions of lives during plagues, wars, and constant political turmoil. The 5 Stoic habits I'll share will give you a fortress of calm that no pressure can penetrate, using the same philosophical principles that sustained emperors through the darkest times in human history. What worked to maintain peace of mind while governing millions can work for anyone facing modern stress and uncertainty. But first, like this video, subscribe for more Stoic wisdom, and comment where you're watching from. I want to see how far the need for inner strength has spread. When I first donned the purple cloak of emperor, I believed that power would bring me control over my circumstances. How wrong I was. The weight of that garment felt heavier than any armor I had worn in battle, and with each passing day, I discovered that ruling the known world meant surrendering control over almost everything that mattered. I remember the exact moment when this truth struck me like lightning. It was during the 2nd year of my reign, when reports arrived that a plague had begun spreading from the eastern provinces. As I sat in my private chambers, surrounded by scrolls containing casualty reports, I felt a familiar rage building within me. Why couldn't I stop this disease? Why couldn't my vast armies march against this invisible enemy? Then something shifted in my mind. I had been studying the writings of Epictetus, and his words echoed in my consciousness. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. In that moment, I understood that my suffering came not from the plague itself, but from my desperate desire to control it. This realization became the foundation of everything I would later develop. I began to see that true strength wasn't about commanding external forces, but about mastering the one domain I actually controlled: my own responses, judgments, and actions. The purple cloak remained heavy, but I learned to carry its weight differently. That night, I began what would become my daily practice of philosophical reflection. I would wake before dawn and examine the day ahead, asking myself not how can I control what happens, but how can I respond with virtue regardless of what happens. I wrote down my thoughts, creating what would later become my personal meditations. The transformation wasn't immediate. For months, I struggled against my imperial instincts to micromanage every crisis. But gradually, I developed 5 specific habits that became my anchors during the storms of leadership. These weren't abstract philosophical concepts. They were practical tools forged in the crucible of real responsibility for millions of lives. When the Germanic tribes began their incursions along our northern borders, I applied these habits on the battlefield. When senators plotted against my policies, I used them in the marble halls of power. When my own children fell ill, I relied on them in my most vulnerable moments as a father. Each habit became a pillar supporting my inner citadel, that unassailable fortress of peace that no external circumstance could breach. The plague would rage for years, wars would stretch across decades, and personal tragedies would test every fiber of my being. But I had discovered something more valuable than all the gold in Rome's treasury: the ability to remain unshaken while everything around me trembled. These 5 habits didn't make me immune to pain or exempt from difficulty. Instead, they gave me something far more precious: the capacity to find meaning and maintain my humanity while bearing burdens that would have crushed a lesser prepared mind. The first habit I developed was what I came to call the morning daily ritual of mental fortification that became as essential to my survival as physical armor was to my soldiers. Each dawn, before the demands of empire could assault my consciousness, I would spend the first hour in deliberate contemplation, preparing my mind for whatever trials the day might bring. I discovered this necessity during my early months as emperor, when I found myself constantly reactive, lurching from crisis to crisis like a ship without an anchor. One particularly brutal morning, after receiving word that both a rebellion had erupted in Britain and grain shipments from Egypt had failed, I realized I was beginning each day already defeated by circumstances I hadn't yet encountered. That's when I began my practice of what the Stoics call the discipline of perception, the habit of examining my initial judgments about events before they could disturb my peace. I would sit in my private study, watching the sun rise over the 7 hills of Rome, and deliberately consider the day ahead not as a series of problems to be solved, but as opportunities to practice virtue. My morning ritual became carefully structured. First, I would remind myself of the fundamental Stoic principle. Today, I will be meeting interference, ingratitude, insolence, disloyalty, ill will, and selfishness. But I won't be surprised or disturbed, for I can't imagine a world without such people. This wasn't pessimism, was preparation. By anticipating difficulties, I prevented them from catching me off guard and triggering my emotional reactions. Next, I would visualize specific challenges I might face that day and mentally rehearse responding to them with patience, wisdom, justice, and courage. If I knew I had to meet with difficult senators, I would practice seeing their opposition not as personal attacks, but as opportunities to demonstrate imperial composure. If military dispatches awaited my review, I would prepare to receive bad news without letting it poison my judgment about necessary actions. The transformation was remarkable. Instead of beginning each day feeling overwhelmed by my responsibilities, I started each morning feeling prepared for them. My advisors noticed the change immediately, became calmer in meetings, more thoughtful in my responses, less likely to make decisions based on frustration or fear. But the real power of this habit revealed itself during genuine crises. When word came that Germanic tribes had breached our defenses along the Danube, I didn't experience the familiar surge of panic and rage. Instead, I felt an almost supernatural calm descend upon me. My morning preparation had created what I began thinking of as an inner citadel, fortress of tranquility that no external event could storm. This wasn't emotional numbness or indifference to suffering. Rather, it was the cultivation of what I came to understand as true strength, the ability to respond to any situation from a place of wisdom rather than emotional reactivity. The inner citadel became my refuge, accessible at any moment through the simple practice of stepping back and examining my perceptions before they could disturb my peace. The second habit that transformed my approach to leadership was learning to distinguish between what I could control and what I could not, and then pouring all my energy exclusively into the former while releasing my attachment to the latter. This discipline of desire, as Epictetus taught, became my pathway to inner freedom, even while bearing the heaviest external responsibilities. I learned this lesson through bitter experience during my first major military campaign along the frontier. For months, I had been obsessing over factors completely beyond my influence: the weather, the enemy's tactics, the loyalty of barbarian allies, the speed of our supply lines from Rome. I would lie awake in my tent, my mind churning through endless scenarios, trying to mentally control outcomes that depended on 1,000 variables outside my authority. The futility of this approach struck me one freezing morning when our scouts reported that Germanic reinforcements had arrived during the night, doubling the enemy's strength. My initial reaction was rageness at the enemy, but at fate itself for disrupting my carefully laid plans. I found myself mentally arguing with reality, as if my desire for different circumstances could somehow alter the facts before me. That's when I remembered a passage from Epictetus that I had memorized but never truly understood. Don't demand that things happen as you wish that they happen as they do happen, and you will go on well. In that moment, standing in the pre-dawn cold outside my command tent, I experienced a profound shift in perspective. The Germanic reinforcements weren't a catastrophe. They were simply the current reality that required my response. I began practicing what I called the circle of control exercise. Each morning, I would draw to mental circles, a small inner circle containing everything actually within my influence, and a larger outer circle containing everything I wished I could control, but couldn't. Into the inner circle went my decisions, my responses, my attitudes, my effort, and my values. Into the outer circle went the weather, other people's choices, the outcome of battles, the timing of events, and the duration of my life. The revelation was liberating. Instead of exhausting myself trying to manipulate factors in the outer circle, I learned to pour all my attention into the inner circle, where my effort could actually make a difference. When Germanic warriors proved more formidable than expected, I stopped wasting energy wishing they were weaker and focused instead on adapting our tactics. When supply lines were disrupted, I stopped cursing the inconvenience and concentrated on finding alternative solutions. This practice extended far beyond military campaigns. In the Senate, when senators opposed my policies, I learned to focus not on changing their minds, which was beyond my control, but on presenting my case with clarity and integrity, which was entirely within my power. When the plague devastated our cities, I stopped demanding that the gods halt the disease and concentrated instead on organizing effective relief efforts. The discipline of desire didn't eliminate my preferences or make me indifferent to outcomes. I still preferred victory to defeat, health to sickness, loyalty to betrayal, but I learned to hold these preferences lightly, like water cupped in my palms, rather than chains binding my happiness to events beyond my influence. The third habit that became essential to my mental strength was learning to anchor my consciousness in the present moment, rather than allowing my mind to be tormented by regrets about the past or anxieties about the future. This practice of presence became my shield against the psychological warfare that accompanies any position of great responsibility. I discovered the necessity of this discipline during a particularly dark period of my reign, when multiple crises seemed to compound. Daily, the plague was claiming thousands of lives. Germanic tribes were pressing our northern borders, and rumors of revolt stirred in distant provinces. I found my mind constantly oscillating between bitter memories of better times and fearful projections of catastrophic futures. One evening, as I sat in my study reviewing casualty reports from the frontier, I noticed that my suffering wasn't actually caused by the words on the parchment before me. The real torment came from my mind's relentless journey between past failures and future disasters. I would read about yesterday's losses and immediately spiral into regret about decisions I had made months earlier. Then I would imagine how much worse things might become, creating elaborate scenarios of defeat and humiliation that hadn't occurred and might never occur. In that moment of recognition, I remembered another teaching from my philosophical studies. Confine yourself to the present moment. This breath, this heartbeat, this single instant of awareness was the only time in which I actually existed, and the only time in which I could take effective action. The past was beyond alteration, the future beyond prediction, but the present was entirely within my domain. I began practicing what I called the Dana, simple but powerful technique of catching my mind when it wandered into temporal fantasies, and gently bringing it back to immediate reality. When I found myself reliving past mistakes, I would ask, what action does this moment require? When anxiety about future possibilities began to consume my thoughts, I would focus on my breathing and the physical sensations of my body, until my awareness settled into the present. This wasn't about avoiding planning or learning from experience. Strategic thinking about future possibilities and honest assessment of past decisions remained essential to effective leadership. But I learned to distinguish between productive reflection and mental torture. Productive reflection served current decision-making. Mental torture served only to drain my energy and cloud my judgment. The practice transformed my daily experience of ruling an empire. Instead of carrying the weight of every decision I had ever made and every possible future catastrophe, I learned to focus my attention on the single moment where my power actually existed. When meeting with advisors, instead of half listening while my mind rehearsed arguments from previous meetings or worried about tomorrow's challenges, I became fully present to the conversation at hand. The battlefield provided the ultimate test of this discipline. During the Germanic campaigns, moments of life and death decision required absolute presence. There was no time for regret about tactical errors from previous engagements or anxiety about how the campaign might unfold over months. There was only the immediate need to assess current conditions and respond appropriately. I learned that presence was not a passive state but an active choice, requiring constant vigilance. My mind had been trained by years of imperial responsibility to race constantly between past and future, treating the present as merely a brief stop between more important, temporal destinations. Training it to remain anchored in the now required the same discipline I applied to physical conditioning, daily practice, patient persistence, and gentle but firm redirection when attention wandered. The fourth habit that fundamentally changed how I approached every decision was learning to measure success not by external outcomes, but by whether I had acted with virtue, wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance. This practice freed me from the tyranny of results I couldn't guarantee and gave me an unshakable foundation for self-respect that no external circumstance could erode. This lesson came to me through painful experience. During a senatorial crisis early in my reign, I had spent months crafting legislation that I believed would benefit the people, consulting experts, weighing different perspectives, and ensuring the proposals served the common good. When I presented it to the Senate, however, it was rejected. Through a combination of political maneuvering, personal grudges, and factional interests that had nothing to do with the merits of the proposal itself. My initial reaction was devastation. I had measured my worth as an emperor by my ability to achieve beneficial outcomes for Rome. The rejection felt like a personal failure, proof that I was inadequate to the demands of leadership. I spent sleepless nights questioning every aspect of my approach, wondering if I lacked the political cunning necessary to govern effectively. Then I encountered a passage in my philosophical studies that revolutionized my understanding of success. Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking. I began to realize that I had been making my happiness dependent on factors largely beyond my control, other people's decisions, political dynamics, and outcomes that depended on countless variables outside my influence. I started practicing a new way of evaluating my actions. Instead of asking, did I achieve the result I wanted, I began asking, did I act with wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance? This shift in focus was initially difficult because it required me to develop entirely new metrics for success. But gradually, I discovered that this approach gave me something far more valuable than the ability to manipulate outcomes. It gave me the capacity to respect myself regardless of external circumstances. When I revisited that rejected legislation through this new lens, I realized that my worth as a leader wasn't diminished by the Senate's decision. I had researched thoroughly, consulted widely, considered the common good, and presented my case with integrity. I had acted with wisdom and justice. The senators' rejection reflected their choices, not my adequacy as an emperor. This understanding transformed how I approached every subsequent challenge. During military campaigns, I learned to measure victory not only by territory gained or enemies defeated, but by whether I had led with courage while treating both allies and enemies justly. When the plague ravaged our cities, I evaluated my response not only by lives saved, but by whether I had acted with compassion and wisdom in allocating limited resources. The 4 cardinal virtues became my daily compass. Wisdom guided me to seek truth and make decisions based on understanding rather than impulse. Justice ensured that I considered the welfare of all Romans, not just those with political influence. Courage enabled me to do what was right even when it was difficult or unpopular. Temperance helped me maintain balance and avoid the excesses that destroy effective leadership. This practice didn't make me indifferent to outcomes. I still preferred success to failure, peace to war, prosperity to suffering, but it liberated me from the exhausting cycle of euphoria and despair that comes from tying your self-worth to results you can't fully control. Asterisk. The 5th and final habit that completed my framework for unbreakable mental strength was learning to act with complete commitment while remaining emotionally detached from outcomes. This discipline of action allowed me to give my absolute best effort to every decision while maintaining the inner peace that comes from accepting whatever results might follow. I mastered this practice during the most consequential decision of my reign, whether to launch a massive military campaign against the Germanic tribes who had been terrorizing our northern provinces for years. The choice carried enormous implications. Success might secure Rome's borders for generations, but failure could destabilize the entire empire and cost thousands of Roman lives. For weeks, I gathered intelligence, consulted my generals, and analyzed every strategic option. The pressure to make the perfect decision was overwhelming. I found myself paralyzed by the weight of potential consequences, endlessly second-guessing every aspect of the proposed campaign. The fear of choosing wrongly threatened to prevent me from choosing at all. That's when I discovered the liberating power of what I came to call purposeful action. The ability to commit fully to a course of action after careful deliberation, then release attachment to specific outcomes while remaining flexible enough to adapt as circumstances evolved. This wasn't recklessness or indifference. It was the recognition that the quality of my decision-making process was the only aspect truly within my control. I developed a systematic approach to important decisions. First, I would gather the best available information and seek counsel from trusted advisors. Second, I would consider the decision through the lens of virtue, asking which option best served wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance. Third, I would choose the course of action that aligned with these principles and my duty as emperor. Finally, and this was the crucial step, I would commit completely to implementing that decision while simultaneously releasing my attachment to any particular outcome. When I finally ordered the Germanic campaign to proceed, I did so with total conviction and full awareness that the results were ultimately beyond my complete control. I had made the best decision possible with the information available, guided by my commitment to protecting Roman citizens and maintaining the security of our borders. Whether the campaign succeeded or failed would depend on countless factors, whether enemy tactics, the courage of our soldiers, supply line efficiency, and pure chance. This approach transformed my experience of leadership. Instead of being consumed by anxiety about results, I could focus entirely on executing decisions with excellence. During the campaign itself, when unexpected developments required tactical adjustments, I wasn't paralyzed by regret about my initial choices or fear about how modifications might affect final outcomes. I simply assessed new information and made whatever adjustments served our objectives. The discipline of action also taught me the difference between emotional investment and practical commitment. I remained deeply committed to achieving the best possible results for Rome while avoiding the emotional roller coaster that comes from tying personal happiness to outcomes beyond my full control. I could feel disappointed by setbacks without being devastated, pleased by successes without being euphoric. This balance proved essential during the long years of frontier warfare that followed. Some battles were won, others lost. Some strategic objectives were achieved quickly, others required patient persistence over many seasons. Throughout these fluctuations, I maintained steady focus on what remained constant: my responsibility to make the best decisions possible with available information and to execute those decisions with unwavering commitment to virtue. The German campaign ultimately succeeded in securing our borders, but I had learned that my worth as an emperor didn't depend on that success. It depended on the integrity of my decision-making process and my commitment to acting with virtue regardless of outcomes. The true test of these 5 Stoic habits came during the darkest period of my reign, the Antonine Plague that swept through the Roman Empire like a merciless tide, claiming millions of lives and threatening the very foundations of our civilization. It was during this crisis that I discovered whether my philosophical practices were mere intellectual exercises or genuine sources of strength, capable of sustaining a leader through humanity's greatest challenges. The plague arrived with our returning legions from campaigns in the east, spreading with terrifying speed from port to port, city to city, until no corner of the empire remained untouched. Each morning brought reports of staggering death tolls. Entire neighborhoods in Rome reduced to ghost towns, military units decimated, agricultural regions left with insufficient workers to harvest crops that would feed the survivors. As emperor, I faced an impossible situation. Every traditional solution seemed inadequate against an enemy we couldn't see, fight, or negotiate with. The gods appeared deaf to our prayers, our physicians helpless against the disease's advance, our military might useless against microscopic invaders. For the first time in my reign, I confronted a challenge that couldn't be solved through conventional imperial power. My first habit: morning preparation and the inner citadel became my anchor during those dark months. Each dawn, before reviewing the latest casualty reports, I would spend time fortifying my mind against the despair that threatened to overwhelm me. I would remind myself that this plague, however devastating, was still just an external circumstance that couldn't touch my essential self unless I allowed it to do so. The discipline of desire proved equally crucial. I had to release my attachment to outcomes. I couldn't control the speed of the plague's spread, the effectiveness of our limited medical interventions, the number of lives lost each day. Instead, I focused entirely on factors within my influence: organizing relief efforts, maintaining public order, ensuring fair distribution of food supplies, and providing steady leadership when others succumbed to panic. Present moment awareness became a survival skill. When the magnitude of suffering threatened to crush my spirit, I learned to focus on immediate, actionable tasks rather than becoming paralyzed by the enormity of the overall crisis. Instead of dwelling on yesterday's losses or tomorrow's projected casualties, I concentrated on today's decisions about resource allocation, policy adjustments, and personal appearances that might maintain public morale. The virtue-centered approach to success sustained me when every conventional measure of imperial achievement crumbled. I couldn't stop the plague, couldn't restore the dead to life, couldn't return the empire to its pre-crisis prosperity, but I could ensure that our response embodied wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance. I could treat all citizens, rich and poor, citizen and slave, with equal concern during relief efforts. The discipline of action enabled me to make necessary decisions despite unprecedented uncertainty. When advisors disagreed about quarantine measures, I had to choose courses of action based on limited information, while accepting that any decision might prove inadequate. When food shortages required rationing, I implemented policies knowing they would cause hardship, while trusting that the alternatives would cause greater suffering. These 5 habits didn't eliminate my grief over the immense loss of life or my frustration with our limited ability to combat the disease, but they prevented these natural human emotions from destroying my capacity to lead effectively during a crisis that tested every assumption about imperial power and human resilience. The Germanic frontier became my graduate school in the application of Stoic principles under extreme physical and psychological pressure. For years, I lived in military camps along the Danube, facing enemies who fought with the desperation of people defending their homeland against an empire they viewed as an existential threat. It was here that I learned the deepest lessons about the relationship between outer conflict and inner peace. The barbarian tribes employed tactics specifically designed to break Roman morale. They would attack at dawn with blood-curdling war cries, retreat into impenetrable forests when we advanced, and emerge unexpectedly to strike our supply lines. They knew they couldn't defeat Roman discipline in traditional warfare, so they waged psychological warfare intended to exhaust our mental resilience before our physical strength. During the first months of the campaign, I watched seasoned centurions, men who had served with distinction across the empire, begin to crack under the constant uncertainty. They couldn't anticipate when the next attack would come, couldn't predict enemy movements, couldn't even be certain that today's ally among the Germanic tribes wouldn't become tomorrow's enemy. The inability to control their environment slowly eroded their confidence and effectiveness. I realized that I was witnessing on a large scale the same psychological dynamics I had learned to master in my personal life. The Germanic warfare was an external manifestation of the internal battles we all fight between our desire for certainty and the reality of uncertainty, between our need for control and the truth of our limited influence over outcomes. My morning preparation ritual became even more essential in the harsh conditions of frontier warfare. While my soldiers were sharpening their weapons, I was sharpening my mind, preparing not just for physical combat, but for the mental challenges of leading men who were far from home, facing an enemy that refused to fight according to Roman conventions. Each dawn, I would remind myself that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act virtuously despite fear. The discipline of desire proved invaluable when dealing with setbacks that would have demoralized me in my earlier years. As emperor, when Germanic raiders destroyed a supply convoy despite our precautions, I had to focus not on my wish that the attack hadn't occurred, which served no useful purpose, but on the immediate task of adapting our logistics to prevent future losses. When winter weather forced us to abandon a promising offensive, I concentrated on using the delay to better prepare our forces, rather than lamenting the lost opportunity. Present moment awareness became a tactical advantage. In the fluid conditions of frontier warfare, commanders who dwelt on previous defeats or worried excessively about future campaigns made poor decisions about current threats. I learned to assess each situation based on immediate conditions rather than being distracted by regrets or anxieties that clouded judgment. The virtue-centered approach to success transformed how I evaluated military progress. Instead of measuring victory only by territory conquered or enemies killed, I began assessing our campaigns by whether we fought with honor, treated prisoners justly, maintained discipline among our troops, and represented Roman values worthy of respect even from our enemies. The discipline of action enabled me to make necessary tactical decisions quickly, while accepting that perfect information was rarely available. When scouts reported enemy movements, I had to choose responses based on incomplete intelligence while remaining flexible enough to adapt when new information emerged. Through years of frontier warfare, I discovered that the same mental disciplines that sustained me in the marble halls of Rome worked equally well in the mud and blood of Germanic battlefields. Perhaps nowhere did my 5 Stoic habits prove more essential than in protecting me from the corrupting influence of absolute power itself. When you hold the authority to command legions, determine the fate of provinces, and shape the destiny of millions, the temptation to believe in your own omnipotence becomes a daily battle requiring constant philosophical vigilance. The intoxication of imperial power is subtle and seductive. Every morning, I would wake to find servants eager to fulfill my slightest wish, advisors praising my wisdom regardless of its actual merit, and citizens across the empire living or dying based on decisions I made from the comfort of my palace. The danger wasn't that I would become a tyrant overnight, but that I would gradually lose touch with my own humanity and the reality of my limitations. I remember a particular incident that illustrated this peril vividly. During a Senate meeting, I had grown frustrated with opposition to a policy I favored. For a moment, I felt the impulse to simply declare that my will would be law, ending the debate through the exercise of raw authority. The thought lasted only seconds, but it terrified me. I recognized that this was exactly how good emperors transformed into monsters, through small compromises with expedients that gradually eroded their commitment to virtue. My morning preparation ritual became a daily inoculation against imperial arrogance. Each dawn, I would deliberately remind myself of my mortality, my fallibility, and my fundamental equality with every other human being. I would reflect on the fact that emperors before me had died, that my reign was temporary, and that my authority was a responsibility to serve others, rather than an license to serve myself. The discipline of desire proved crucial in resisting the endless appetite for control that power tends to generate. The more authority I wielded, the more tempting it became to try controlling ever smaller details of imperial administration. I had to constantly remind myself that effective leadership often meant restraining my desire to micromanage and trusting capable subordinates to handle matters within their expertise. Present moment awareness helped me stay grounded in reality, rather than becoming lost in the grandiose fantasies that power can inspire. When courtiers flattered my intelligence, I would focus on the actual quality of my current thinking, rather than letting praise inflate my self-perception. When citizens hailed me as a god, I would concentrate on my very human need for food, sleep, and companionship. The virtue-centered approach to success protected me from the natural tendency to measure imperial achievement by the expansion of power rather than the quality of its exercise. I learned to evaluate my reign not by how much control I could accumulate, but by how well I used existing authority to serve justice, wisdom, courage, and temperance. The discipline of action enabled me to make necessary decisions without being paralyzed by the weight of their consequences. Knowing that millions of people would be affected by my choices could have led to endless hesitation and second-guessing. Instead, I learned to make the best decisions possible with available information, then commit fully to implementing them while accepting responsibility for outcomes. These habits didn't make me a perfect emperor. No such thing exists, but they helped me remain a recognizably human emperor, connected to the moral principles that gave my authority legitimacy and prevented absolute power from corrupting absolutely. The most severe test of my Stoic habits came not from barbarian invasions or political conspiracies, but from the intimate tragedies that struck my family. When personal loss threatens to shatter your heart, no amount of philosophical preparation feels adequate to the devastation. Yet it was precisely during these moments of profound grief that my 5 habits proved their deepest value, not by eliminating pain, but by preventing pain from destroying my capacity to continue serving those who depended on me. I lost 9 of my 14 children during my lifetime. Each death felt like a piece of my soul being torn away. When my son Anusvirus died at age 7, I experienced a grief so intense that for days I could barely speak. When my daughter Demetia Faustina passed away as an infant, I questioned whether the gods were punishing me for some unknown transgression. When the plague claimed my adopted brother Lucius Verus, I felt the isolation that comes from losing someone who truly understood the burdens of leadership. During these dark periods, my morning preparation ritual became a lifeline rather than merely a routine. Each dawn, I had to consciously choose to rebuild my inner citadel after grief had demolished it during the night. I would remind myself that my children's deaths, however devastating, were external events that couldn't diminish my essential self unless I allowed them to do so. This wasn't callousness that my surviving children, my wife, and the Roman people needed me to remain functional despite my personal losses. The discipline of desire proved especially difficult, but essential when dealing with family tragedies. My natural parental instinct was to rage against fate, to demand that my children be restored to life, to bargain with the gods for different outcomes. I had to repeatedly practice accepting what I could not control, fact of their deaths while focusing on what remained within my power, honoring their memory, caring for my surviving family members, and continuing to serve as emperor despite my broken heart. Present moment awareness became a survival technique during the acute phases of grief, when memories of lost children threatened to overwhelm me. During important meetings or military campaigns, I had to learn to acknowledge the pain without becoming lost in it. I would allow myself to feel the sadness fully, but only for appropriate moments. Then return my attention to immediate responsibilities that couldn't wait for my grief to resolve. The virtue-centered approach to success helped me find meaning in suffering that otherwise felt senseless. I couldn't understand why the gods would take innocent children, but I could ensure that my response to these losses embodied the best qualities of human character. I could model for others how to bear unbearable loss with dignity. I could use my understanding of grief to respond more compassionately. When other parents faced similar tragedies, the discipline of action enabled me to continue functioning as emperor even when personal sorrow made every decision feel monumentally difficult. I had to participate in Senate meetings while mourning my son, lead military campaigns while grieving my brother, and make policy decisions that affected millions while wrestling with questions about divine justice that had no satisfactory answers. My wife Faustina watched me apply these habits during our shared losses, and initially worried that philosophy was making me cold or unfeeling. But gradually she recognized that the Stoic practices didn't diminish my love for our children. They allowed that love to coexist with the responsibilities I couldn't abandon, even during periods of devastating personal loss. As my understanding of these 5 Stoic habits deepened through years of application, I began to realize that my greatest responsibility as emperor wasn't merely to practice them myself, but to model them for others who would inherit the burden of leadership after my death. The true test of any philosophy isn't whether it sustains one person through adversity, but whether it can be transmitted to others who face their own unique challenges. I never formally established a school of philosophy or delivered lectures to assembled crowds. Instead, I taught through the daily example of how an emperor guided by Stoic principles conducted himself during both triumphant and terrible times. Every public appearance, every decision in council, every response to crisis became an opportunity to demonstrate how these habits could transform leadership from mere exercise of power into genuine service to the common good. My son Commodus presented the most important and ultimately most heartbreaking test of my ability to transmit these values. From his earliest years, I included him in my morning preparation rituals, explaining how I used the quiet hours before dawn to fortify my mind for the day's challenges. I wanted him to understand that strength of character required the same daily maintenance as physical fitness, consistent practice rather than sporadic effort when crises demanded immediate resilience. During our campaigns along the Germanic frontier, I deliberately brought Commodus with me so he could observe how Stoic principles applied to military leadership. When our scouts reported enemy movements that disrupted our plans, I would explain to him how the discipline of desire helped me focus on adapting our strategy rather than wasting energy lamenting the inconvenience. When we received news of setbacks in other theaters, I demonstrated how present moment awareness prevented anxiety about distant problems from clouding judgment about immediate tactical decisions. I taught him that imperial authority was a tool for serving others rather than satisfying personal ambitions. When we captured Germanic prisoners, I showed him how virtue-centered leadership required treating enemies with justice, even when Roman law permitted harsher measures. When local governors sought imperial favor through flattery and expensive gifts, I explained how the discipline of action meant making appointments based on competence rather than personal loyalty or political convenience. But teaching through example proved more challenging than teaching through words. Commodus could observe my external behaviors, my calm responses to crises, my fair treatment of subordinates, my disciplined daily routines, without necessarily understanding or adopting the internal practices that generated those behaviors. He learned to mimic the forms of Stoic leadership without internalizing the philosophical foundations that gave those forms meaning and authenticity. Other students proved more receptive to the deeper lessons. Marcus Claudius Fronto, who served as my rhetorical tutor in youth and became a trusted advisor in my maturity, began incorporating Stoic principles into his own teaching methods. He observed how my morning preparation ritual improved my performance in Senate debates and developed similar practices for preparing legal arguments in court. Several of my military commanders adopted modified versions of the 5 habits after watching how they enhanced my effectiveness during extended campaigns. They noticed that my ability to remain calm during tactical setbacks improved overall military morale and began developing their own techniques for maintaining emotional equilibrium under pressure. The most important lesson I learned about teaching these habits was that example alone, however consistent, couldn't guarantee transmission. Each person had to discover their own motivation for philosophical practice and develop their own understanding of how Stoic principles applied to their specific circumstances and responsibilities. Asterisk. Though 18 centuries separate my reign from your modern world, I observe that the fundamental challenges of leadership and the essential sources of mental strength remain remarkably constant. The arena may have shifted from marble palaces to glass offices, from military camps to conference rooms, but human nature with its vulnerabilities to stress, pressure, and the corrupting influence of authority has changed very little. The 5 Stoic habits that sustained me as emperor can transform your experience of contemporary workplace challenges. Consider the modern equivalent of my morning preparation ritual. Before checking your phone, reading emails, or attending your first meeting, spend 15 minutes fortifying your mind for the day ahead. Visualize the challenging conversations you might face and mentally rehearse responding with patience rather than defensiveness. Anticipate potential setbacks and prepare to view them as opportunities to practice resilience rather than personal attacks on your competence. Your contemporary workplace demands the same discipline of desire that I applied to imperial administration. You cannot control your company's quarterly earnings, your boss's mood, the timing of promotions, or market conditions that affect your industry. But you have complete authority over your effort, your attitude, your professional development, and your responses to colleagues who frustrate or inspire you. Focus your energy entirely on these controllable factors while releasing attachment to outcomes that depend on variables beyond your influence. present moment. Awareness offers liberation from the anxiety that plagues modern professionals who feel perpetually behind, constantly overwhelmed by competing priorities and endless streams of information. When you find your mind racing between yesterday's mistakes and tomorrow's deadlines, practice returning to immediate tasks that require your attention now. The email you're writing, the conversation you're having, the decision you're making in this moment, these are the only places where your power actually exists. The virtue-centered approach to success provides an alternative to the exhausting cycle of euphoria and despair that comes from measuring your worth by external metrics. Salary increases, performance reviews, social media engagement, or competitive rankings against colleagues. Instead, evaluate your professional success by whether you acted with wisdom in your decisions, justice in your treatment of others, courage in addressing difficult situations, and temperance in balancing work demands with personal well-being. The discipline of action enables you to make necessary career decisions without being paralyzed by uncertainty about outcomes you cannot predict or control. Whether you're considering a job change, proposing a new project, or addressing conflict with a difficult colleague, you can commit fully to well-reasoned choices, while accepting that results will depend on factors beyond your complete influence. These habits prove especially valuable when dealing with workplace politics that mirror the senatorial intrigues I navigated in ancient Rome. Difficult colleagues who undermine your projects, supervisors who take credit for your work, organizational changes that disrupt your plans. These modern challenges trigger the same emotional responses as barbarian invasions or political conspiracies triggered in me. The key insight that transformed my reign applies equally to your career. External circumstances have only the power over your well-being that you grant them through your responses. No deadline, difficult person, or professional setback can disturb your inner peace without your permission. The transformation from understanding these Stoic principles intellectually to experiencing their power in your daily life requires deliberate, consistent practice. Philosophy without application remains merely interesting conversation. Applied philosophy becomes a source of genuine strength that sustains you through any challenge. Let me share the specific techniques I developed for making these 5 habits as natural and automatic as breathing. Begin each morning with what I call the preparation sequence. Set your alarm 15 minutes earlier than usual and use this time exclusively for mental preparation before the day's demands begin. Sit quietly and review your schedule, identifying potential challenges and visualizing yourself responding to them with calm competence. Remind yourself of the fundamental Stoic principle. You have complete control over your responses and no control over external circumstances. Create specific mantras for each of the 5 habits that you can invoke throughout the day when stress threatens your equilibrium. For the inner citadel, use "This cannot disturb me unless I allow it." For the discipline of desire, remind yourself, "I focus only on what I can control." For present moment awareness, return to this breath, this moment, this choice. For virtue-centered success, ask, what would wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance do here? For the discipline of action, affirm, I commit fully while releasing outcomes. Develop an evening review practice that mirrors my nightly meditations. Before sleep, spend 10 minutes examining the day that has passed. Identify moments when you successfully applied Stoic principles and acknowledge these victories without pride. Notice situations where stress or emotion caused you to react rather than respond, and view these as learning opportunities without self-criticism. Ask yourself, what did I handle well today? What can I improve tomorrow? How did I grow in wisdom, justice, courage, or temperance? Transform routine daily activities into opportunities for Stoic practice. When stuck in traffic, practice accepting circumstances beyond your control rather than generating stress over delays you cannot prevent. When dealing with difficult people, use these interactions as exercises in maintaining your inner peace, while responding with patience and understanding. When facing deadlines or pressure, practice focusing entirely on the quality of your effort rather than anxiety about outcomes. Create environmental cues that remind you to apply these habits throughout the day. Place a small object on your desk that triggers awareness when you notice it. Set random alerts on your phone with brief Stoic reminders. Write key principles on cards and review them during transition moments between meetings or activities. Build accountability into your practice by tracking your progress without becoming obsessive about measurement. Keep a simple journal, noting which habits you successfully applied each day and which situations challenged your philosophical composure. Share your commitment to Stoic practice with trusted friends or family members who can offer gentle reminders when they notice you forgetting. Your principles start small and build gradually. Attempting to transform your entire approach to life overnight leads to frustration and abandonment of the practice. Begin with one habit that resonates most strongly with your current challenges. Master this single practice for several weeks before adding additional elements. The goal is sustainable transformation rather than dramatic but temporary change. Remember that setbacks are inevitable and valuable. Every time you react with anger, anxiety, or attachment to outcomes you cannot control, you're not failing at Stoic practice. You're identifying specific areas where your training needs strengthening. I spent decades developing these habits and continued learning from my mistakes until the day I died. The ultimate goal isn't to become emotionally numb or indifferent to outcomes, but to maintain your capacity for wise action and inner peace, regardless of external circumstances. These habits don't eliminate life's challenges. They transform your relationship with those challenges from reactive victimhood to responsive mastery. Perhaps the most revolutionary insight that emerged from years of applying these 5 Stoic habits was the recognition that obstacles aren't interruptions to be endured. On the path to strength, they are the path itself. Every setback, every difficulty, every moment of pressure becomes an opportunity to practice and strengthen your philosophical muscles. This understanding transformed my relationship with adversity. From resistance to gratitude. I discovered this principle during the darkest period of the Germanic campaigns, when everything that could go wrong seemed to align against our efforts. Supply lines were disrupted by unusually severe weather. Our Germanic allies defected to the enemy. Reinforcements from Rome were delayed by political complications, and a fever swept through our ranks, weakening our fighting capacity just when we needed maximum strength. My initial reaction was familiar frustration. Why couldn't anything proceed according to plan? Why did every solution create new problems? Why couldn't the gods grant us at least temporary reprieve from this cascade of difficulties? Then I remembered a passage from Epictetus that suddenly took on new meaning. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. I began to see each obstacle not as an unfortunate deviation from our objectives, but as precisely the training our expedition needed to develop the resilience required for ultimate success. The supply disruptions forced us to become more creative and self-sufficient. The Allied defections taught us to rely more completely on Roman discipline and unity. The delayed reinforcements encouraged us to develop tactics that maximized our existing resources rather than depending on external support. The fever that weakened our troops became an opportunity to demonstrate that Roman character wasn't dependent on perfect physical conditions. We learned to maintain morale and fighting effectiveness even when circumstances were far from ideal. Each challenge that initially appeared to undermine our mission actually strengthened qualities that proved essential for long-term success. This shift in perspective revolutionized how I approached every aspect of imperial leadership. Political opposition in the Senate, rather than being an annoying impediment to my policies, became training in the art of persuasion and compromise. Economic difficulties throughout the empire, instead of simply being problems to solve, became opportunities to develop more sustainable and equitable approaches to governance. Personal losses and family tragedies, while remaining genuinely painful, also became profound teachers about the nature of love, the reality of impermanence, and the sources of meaning that transcend individual circumstances. I learned that I could grieve deeply while simultaneously recognizing that grief itself was deepening my capacity for compassion and wisdom. The practice of viewing obstacles as training requires a fundamental shift in mental orientation. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" begin asking, "How is this strengthening me?" Rather than seeking the easiest path forward, start looking for the path that will develop the qualities you most need to cultivate. Transform the question, "How can I avoid this difficulty?" into, "How can I use this difficulty to become more resilient?" This doesn't mean seeking out unnecessary hardship or believing that suffering is inherently good. It means recognizing that since difficulties are inevitable in any meaningful life, you can choose to extract maximum growth and strength from whatever challenges you cannot avoid. Every moment of pressure becomes an opportunity to practice maintaining inner peace. Every setback becomes a chance to develop flexibility and creativity. Every conflict becomes training in patience and understanding. The most powerful aspect of this approach is that it eliminates the psychological energy, typically wasted on resenting your circumstances. Instead of fighting against the reality of obstacles, you begin working with them as raw material for building the character and capabilities you need for whatever challenges await you in the future. While Stoic philosophy emphasizes the development of inner strength and self-reliance, I learned through decades of practice that sustainable growth requires connection with others who share your commitment to virtue and wisdom. The path of philosophical development becomes both easier and more profound when you surround yourself with people who understand and support your dedication to these principles. During my early years as emperor, I attempted to develop these habits in isolation, believing that true strength meant complete independence from external support. This approach led to unnecessary struggle and slower progress than might have been possible with the encouragement and insight of fellow practitioners. I eventually discovered that seeking community wasn't a sign of weakness, but a manifestation of wisdom, recognizing that even emperors benefit from relationships that reinforce their commitment to virtue. My most valuable philosophical companion was my tutor Junius Rusticus, who had studied directly under Epictetus. Our regular conversations provided opportunities to examine my application of Stoic principles and identify areas where theoretical understanding hadn't yet translated into consistent practice. He helped me recognize patterns in my thinking that I couldn't see clearly on my own, and offered perspectives on challenges that my position as emperor made difficult to assess objectively. I also found unexpected wisdom in conversations with common soldiers during our frontier campaigns. These men, facing life and death situations with limited resources and no guarantee of survival, had developed practical approaches to courage, acceptance, and present moment awareness that sometimes surpassed the insights of formal philosophers. Their unadorned honesty about fear, loss, and the search for meaning provided grounding that balanced my more abstract, theoretical studies. Building a community of practice doesn't require finding others who share your exact philosophical commitments or terminology. Look instead for people who demonstrate the qualities you're working to develop, those who maintain composure under pressure, treat others with justice and compassion, make decisions based on principle rather than convenience, and show resilience in the face of setbacks. These relationships serve multiple purposes in supporting your philosophical development. They provide accountability through gentle observation and feedback about your progress. They offer encouragement during periods when maintaining your practices feels difficult or pointless. They create opportunities to teach and thereby deepen your own understanding of these principles. They model alternative approaches to applying Stoic habits in circumstances different from your own. Most importantly, a philosophical community helps you avoid the trap of using Stoic principles as emotional armor that distances you from genuine human connection. The goal of these practices isn't to become invulnerable to others, but to become more capable of loving them, wisely supporting them without enabling their destructive patterns, caring about their well-being without trying to control their choices, maintaining your own principles while respecting their autonomy. I learned to view every relationship as an opportunity to practice the virtues I was working to develop. Difficult people became teachers in patience and understanding. Supportive friends became reminders of human goodness worth protecting. Family members became sacred responsibilities for demonstrating how philosophical principles translate into daily acts of love and service. The community that emerges around shared commitment to virtue and wisdom becomes one of life's greatest sources of meaning and strength. These relationships, grounded in mutual respect for each other's growth, rather than mutual dependence on each other's approval, provide support that enhances rather than undermines your developing autonomy and inner peace. As I reflect on decades of applying these 5 Stoic habits through every conceivable challenge, plague and war, political intrigue and personal loss, the corruption of absolute power and the weight of ultimate responsibility, can testify to their transformative power, not as theoretical concepts, but as practical tools that fundamentally alter your relationship with life itself. The compound effect of daily practice creates changes that extend far beyond your ability to handle stress or maintain composure during crises. These habits reshape your understanding of what constitutes genuine success, authentic strength, and meaningful contribution to the world. They provide a foundation of inner security that makes you less dependent on external validation, while simultaneously making you more capable of serving others effectively. After years of morning preparation rituals, you develop an unshakable inner citadel that no external circumstance can breach. This isn't emotional numbness or indifference to outcomes, but rather a deep confidence in your ability to respond wisely to whatever life presents. You become someone who faces difficulties with curiosity rather than dread, viewing each challenge as an opportunity to apply and strengthen your philosophical understanding. The discipline of desire liberates you from the exhausting cycle of attachment and disappointment that consumes so much human energy. You learn to prefer certain outcomes while holding those preferences lightly, maintaining full commitment to worthy goals while avoiding the despair that comes from tying your happiness to results beyond your complete control. This freedom allows you to take appropriate risks and make bold decisions without being paralyzed by fear of failure. Present moment awareness transforms your daily experience from a constant struggle against time into a series of opportunities for engaged participation in life as it actually unfolds. You spend less energy regretting past decisions or worrying about future possibilities, and more energy responding skillfully to current circumstances. This heightened presence makes you more effective in every area while reducing the stress that comes from mental time travel. The virtue-centered approach to success provides unshakable criteria for self-respect that no external authority can manipulate or destroy. You develop internal metrics for evaluating your life that don't depend on comparative rankings, social approval, or material accumulation. This autonomy makes you less susceptible to manipulation while making you more genuinely helpful to others. who struggle with their own insecurities and fears. The discipline of action enables you to live with the boldness that comes from accepting responsibility for your choices, while releasing attachment to outcomes beyond your control. You become someone who acts decisively based on principle, rather than hesitating endlessly over factors you cannot predict or control. This combination of commitment and detachment allows you to influence the world effectively while maintaining inner peace. Perhaps most importantly, these habits create a legacy that extends beyond your individual life. Others observe your example and begin developing their own philosophical practices. Your capacity to remain calm under pressure, treat others with justice regardless of their behavior toward you, and maintain hope during difficult circumstances becomes a source of strength and inspiration for those around you. The ultimate promise of unbreakable mental strength isn't that you'll avoid suffering or failure, but that you'll develop the wisdom and resilience to transform any experience into an opportunity for growth and service. Asterisk. As the sun sets on my time with you, I want to leave you with the most important truth I discovered during my years as emperor and philosopher. The 5 habits I have shared are not merely techniques for managing stress or achieving professional success, but pathways to discovering the unshakable strength that already exists within you. You possess everything necessary to build mental resilience that no external circumstance can destroy. The capacity for wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance lies dormant in every human soul, waiting only for the daily practice that awakens and strengthens these innate qualities. The morning preparation that fortifies your inner citadel, the discipline that focuses your energy only on controllable factors, the presence that anchors you in reality, the virtue that guides your decisions, and the committed action that moves you forward. These are not foreign impositions, but natural expressions of your highest human potential. The challenges you face in your contemporary world, workplace pressures, relationship difficulties, financial uncertainties, health concerns, political upheavals, variations on the same fundamental human struggles that have tested character and revealed strength throughout history. The specific circumstances change across centuries, but the essential choice remains constant. Will you allow external events to determine your inner experience, or will you claim the sovereign authority over your responses that no power on earth can revoke? I have witnessed empires rise and fall, plagues devastate populations, wars reshape continents, and individual lives end in both triumph and tragedy. Through all these variations in human fortune, I have observed that those who develop unbreakable mental strength share one crucial insight. They understand that their primary responsibility is not to control outcomes, but to control the quality of their participation in whatever life brings. This wisdom will outlast any empire, survive any catastrophe, and transcend any personal limitation you imagine constrains your potential. The Stoic habits I have shared have guided human beings through every conceivable trial for over 2,000 years and will continue, strengthening those who practice them for as long as humanity faces uncertainty and seeks meaning. Begin today. Start with whichever habit resonates most strongly with your current situation, but begin. The transformation you seek doesn't require perfect circumstances, unlimited time, or extraordinary natural abilities. It requires only the decision to practice these principles consistently and the patience to allow their cumulative effect to reshape your experience of being human. Remember that every moment of pressure is an opportunity to practice maintaining inner peace. Every setback is training in resilience. Every difficult person is a teacher in patience and understanding. Every uncertainty is an invitation to focus on factors within your control. Every choice is a chance to act with virtue regardless of external circumstances. You now possess the same wisdom that sustained me through the darkest and brightest moments of imperial responsibility. Use it well, Share it generously, and trust in its power to transform not only your own life, but the lives of all those whose paths intersect with yours. The strength you seek has been within you all along. These habits simply show you how to access it.